My name is Al Fullenkamp, A-L obviously, and Fullenkamp, F-U-L-L-E-N-K-A-M-P.
And Al, what year did you start with the city and what year did you leave the city?
I started with the city on July 19th, 1976, and for some reason that date has been burnt into my mind. It was very interesting. It was a nice start, and it just got better after that. My last day was June 30th, 2014. So, and I was talking earlier that it's so hard to believe that I've been retired now for 7.5 years.
So back in the 70s, what made Al Fullenkamp apply for a job at the City of Kettering?
You know, I thought about it. I was working for a private consultant at the time, and I'll be honest with you that one of the things that really attracted me to Kettering was they had a decent pay scale. Things were pretty bleak at that time out in the private sector, so I thought, well, you know, it's pretty good. And I'd heard a lot of good things about the city of Kettering at that time. So I went in and did my interviews, and after my interviews, I was even more excited about the possibility of getting the job because it just went real well with some good people.
What position did you interview for?
I applied for an engineer within the City of Kettering Engineering Department, and served in that position for quite a few years.
So when you were an engineer, when you first got here, what were you like as a person and what was the city and the culture of the city like?
Well, you know, it was very interesting in that, of course, I was young. We'd only been married 6 years at that point, had one child, another one on the way. And so, you know, young and dumb and happy. And I remained the latter two for the rest of my career, but didn't stay young. But it was really good, and what it really attracted me was the people, and that's carried itself through the whole 38 years I was here.
What were you like? Were you a go-getter? What was your personality back in those days?
My personality back then was get it done and get it done now. You know, and so everything was rush, rush, rush. And it took a lot of years to kind of slow down and think methodically. That was a little bit different than the other people within the department, the Tom Stablers, the Jim Grahams, the Al Walleys. They were, you know, they had more matured and kind of, you know, slow down, think about it, think it through before you act so much. Again, I was young, dumb, and happy, and they kind of, you know, at least slowed me down a little bit.
So over time you realized the bigger picture, not just the task at hand.
Right. Yeah, it was more than just about the next project. You know, you had to look. As a young engineer, you know, I was only concerned with that next project to get that done, and really didn't see how it fit into the whole picture. And so by slowing down a little bit, you got an idea about that this little project that we're working on at this time is part of an overall project. For an example, the first project I ever did was a small sidewalk out in Oak Creek. And you thought to yourself, well, what's the small sidewalk got to do with it? You know, I just wanted to get that couple 100-foot section of sidewalk complete. And then when you really look at how things start tying together, and then later on, I kind of saw how that little piece fit into a greater picture and kind of tied the whole system together. And it went, of course, the sidewalks to roads, to stormwater systems, to all that. You know, we're all just one little piece in a much, much bigger puzzle.
So other than that sidewalk project, when you got to the city, what was the first really big project that you were a part of the team that you worked on for the city?
Probably the first really big one was East Stroop Road. If you recall, at that time, East Stroop Road was excuse me, maybe two or sometimes 3 lanes as you go down East Stroop Road. This is kind of between Marshall and Schroyer Road. But the nice thing about that was that project and that stretch of road is where the Holiday at Home Parade was back in the late 70s and early 80s. And we went in and put a 5-lane road with medians in, which kind of eliminated that, so they had to move Holiday Home over to Far Hills Avenue, which, believe it or not, was a big controversy at the time, but it all seemed to work out. But that was my first big project, and the nice thing about that one was I started at the beginning and worked with the consultants who did the plans on that, and was able to take it from its infancy, and we did a lot of work on that the planning of that project too, and took it all the way through. And by doing that project, you saw how you planned, and then when the construction started, you saw how much of those, not much, but many of those plans didn't quite pan out. So you had to improvise and change things so that they would work. And we did a lot of that and made it work. And now here we are, next year that section of road was going to be 40 years old. And to me, it's brand new.
So throughout your career, you moved up into different positions. Kind of walk me through your career progress.
Right. It was what was really nice, and that was what Kettering was a nice sized city because they were able to do big things, but it was small enough that you were able to rise up through it and see so much of this. So I worked as an engineer for probably 20 years in the engineering department, and then DESI came about, the closure of DESI. So I was able to get involved in all that and help the redevelopment of DESI over there. So I saw a totally different side of engineering and planning when we had to set that up for reuse. So that was really interesting. And then in approximately '98, I came back to be city engineer public service director. So again, I saw another big side, and looking at the public service department now with snow plowing and all of this, so it just opened up a much larger horizon. So that was really enjoyable. And then after serving in that position in 2006, the then city manager, who was relatively new, made an excellent decision to hire me as the assistant city manager, which really made things enjoyable because, of course, out of the city manager's office, you saw 10 times the amount of diversity that I had seen previously. And to me, that was very, very enjoyable.
How did the city change during your career?
There were a lot of changes, especially physical changes. We had a lot of bits and pieces of our infrastructure throughout the city that were incomplete. And then over time, those all kind of got wrapped up. And so now the city's a much smoother from a physical standpoint, and much nicer, I think a much cleaner a city than it was, 40 years ago. But the other part is how much stayed the same. I think the personality and the atmosphere of the city and the people within the city, even though a lot of employees retired and new employees came in, it was really interesting because I think the whole idea was best, and it boiled down to the simple thing is that, here was the city, just do the right thing. And you always got support if you did the right thing. So, and that's what made working so easy. And like I say, it really wasn't work, it was enjoyable to come to work here. And just simply, you had one goal, do the right thing. And it worked out pretty well. Not everybody agreed with it, but as a whole, it made things pretty easy.
Can you expand upon that as far as the relationship with the elected officials and city staff doing the right thing, that the council saw that as the mission as well?
Right. Yeah, and that was one of the really enjoyable things that I got a little bit of interaction with our elected officials in the engineering department as public service director. But when I became assistant city manager, we got a lot more involvement with the city officials. And I wasn't disappointed. Without exception, the city officials always supported that same idea of do the right thing. A lot of times they wanted you to make sure you looked at 5 or 6 different options to get to the right thing. But, it was nothing but support from our city officials.
You mentioned DESI earlier. Why don't you tell a few stories about the DESI redevelopment so that we have that in the footage?
Yeah. The DESI redevelopment was very interesting because we were out there having to deal with consultants with the federal government, and not only just the federal government, but so many branches of the federal government, the economic development agencies of the federal government, the environmental people, the US EPA, the Ohio EPA. You know, we had to deal with all. So one day to the next, you were doing so many different things. You might be deep in worrying about underground water pollution in a certain area, and then next day you're dealing with a lot of demolition, and the next day you're dealing with utility problems that involve, you know, you have to deal with AT&T in New York in order to try to get something resolved. So, you know, it was kind of all over the place, but you had to kind of keep everything and keep everybody heading in that same direction of getting this redeveloped. So it was very interesting and nothing like I've ever experienced.
We probably need somebody to mention that the redevelopment of the Air Force Station was a nationally award-winning redevelopment.
Yeah.
Can you remember what that award was named?
I don't remember. I remember.
Installation of the Year.
Yeah, I remember going to the ceremony. I just don't remember much more about it. But in dealing with the closure of DESI and the Base Realignment Commission, in dealing with them, it was very rewarding. When DESI was first closed, it was very striking when they had the flag retirement ceremony. And that kind of started everything. Up until that point, we were on DESI for relocation, but we really hadn't have much control because the commander was still there, and rightfully so, the commander was in charge of the base. So everything had to kind of work through him. Once the flag decommissioning took place, then it was ours. Then we had to deal with it. And by going through that whole redevelopment and getting everything started, you know, it was nice to get the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Defense there. I still have all the little plaques and everything that you know, resulted from that, and it was an award-winning relocation, but reuse for the base. And it was very interesting because big things were happening when it was DESI here. And of course, we had 1.5 million square feet to try to get to reuse. And we were able to get most of that taken care of. And you know, eventually we were recognized for our efforts.
Do you remember what it was like when Bank One finalized their decision to be the first tenant?
I do remember. There's 3 or 4 key things in my time at the city of Kettering that you know, I remember quite well. And I remember going down to then I think it was Bank One and giving the presentation with then Mayor Dick Hartman and several others on why they should be moving in there. And when they decided they did want to move in there, that was a joyous occasion.
So your first big project was the widening of Stroop Road. What was your last big project?
I think the last big project that I was involved with to any real extent was when I came back from DESI to be the public service director. We had several projects going on at that time. We had Southern Boulevard going on, Schroyer Road going on, parts of Woodman Drive, I believe it was, and Wilmington, and they were all going on at the same time, which was really, you know, those are the things, yes, at the time it was stressful, but looking back on it, it was really rewarding and just really enjoyable. And I was thinking about the way here, you know, that how nice that was, but those things are all 20, 25 years old now, and you know, comes around. That's the one thing is that it's kind of like a guaranteed employment from the standpoint, everything we do. And even though we have a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill coming that's going to pump money into roads and bridges and a lot of that, it's good for a while, but then you've got to readdress it down the road. Nothing lasts forever, and that includes all of our infrastructure.
When you started, we were a developed city, but we lacked infrastructure. When we finished, we were a developed city, and our infrastructure was developed along with all of our land.
Right.
How did that change? the city's focus from infrastructure to, say, quality of life or, any other number of things that we were going towards the end of your career.
Right. And you could really see it going back and looking at it, because when we first came, we were adding lanes to streets. We were, cleaning up areas that were disjointed. Might have been 3 lanes here and 5 lanes here, and we were cleaning those up, but we were expanding our infrastructure. Now we've gone to pretty much totally into a maintenance mode. We're taking care of what we have, and rightfully so. But at the same time, if I recall back then, we as the city didn't get a lot involved in the human quality of life. We had some of it in our Parks and Recreation Department, but now, here 40, 45 years later, there's much more of a focus on the quality of life in Kettering and how that's become so important. As can be seen by our senior service coordinator, our Parks Department is much more involved in the quality of life than they were 40 years ago. And, that's the nature of things, and it should be that way.
Any regrets?
My only regret is I can't start over and do it all again. But no, it was
We have
great.
plenty of openings.
Yeah, but it was, and Jim Odell said it perfectly. When you get this old and it's time to retire, and I retired because I could see that the people coming up were good quality people, and it was going to be left in good hands. So I never had a qualm about retiring. Jim Odell said it best when he said, I don't miss the circus, but I miss the clowns. And that is, I miss the people. And that's why, obviously, in my particular case, I volunteered to substitute deliver mail, because once every couple months I get to come in, travel to the different departments, and see people I hadn't seen in months, sometimes years.
So when you were here at the city, especially in those later years, you were known as the guy who might walk around the building and whistle quite a bit.
Yeah, that's...
Does Al still whistle at home?
I whistle at home, but I have to watch where I whistle. No, I still whistle at home. That's genetic. My father always whistled, and as you probably know, I don't even realize I whistle, but I'm still whistling.
What have we not covered that you wanted to make sure in prepping for this interview that you talked about?
Probably the one thing I wanted to make sure is that what was really enjoyable about doing a project in Kettering, whether it's an infrastructure project or a communications project even, the nice thing was that it was so easy and it was so nice to work with all these different departments. Early on, when it was infrastructure, we worked with the planning department a lot, a la Joe Roller and people like that. It was so nice to be able to work with these different groups. Then later on, communication projects, we might work with all the departments on things like that. And so that was really enjoyable. At least I felt that we were not just in a silo and we're going to do our own thing and that's it. I felt like, boy, let's all get together and do this. And I think you get a lot better result if you do it that way.
What does it say that 7 years now since retirement, that the Fullenkamp still reside in Kettering? What does that say?
It says that I let it be known that the house could be sold at any time, but I'm going to stay with the house. So I hate moving. I just hate moving. Nah, Kettering's a good place to live. We still live in Kettering. It's a good place to live. I just talked to someone this morning moving into Kettering, and she's really excited about it. Kettering's a good place, and it's got a good reputation in the area. And like I said, I'd recommend anybody. Of course, as you know, we've got the housing stock that permits many young people getting started to come into Kettering and be able to get into a home and get started, and that's a great thing, and that's the kind of thing we need to take advantage of, that youth.
So what's next for the city of Kettering?
I think what's next for the city of Kettering is as much as I hate to say it, is probably going to be the effort to maintain their fiscal position because of everything that's happening with COVID and everything else. Because obviously, you can't keep maintaining everything that we have unless you've got the funds to do that. And so maintaining a good fiscal position for the city, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges that I see right now. I think our infrastructure is in pretty good shape. There's always going to be tweaking needed, but just keeping everything on the straight and narrow and making sure that we can do what we want to do is the big thing.
Anything else you want to add?
No, it's a great place. I love my 38 years here. I'd highly recommend it for anybody who wants to have a good career. This is the place for it.